Okay, fantastic. Fantastic. Now, we're here today on the 54665, and we are actually talking with human resources professional Kay Starr. Kay, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Oh,
Thanks for being here.
So human resources, I think for a lot of companies, if you've ever done big business, I think that's synonymous with angel of death. How would you feel about that? I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
Well, maybe not far from the truth.
When I worked for Epic, the medical software giant.
Okay, is familiar.
Familiar with that.
I'm
She's
sure
been in
you
all
are.
the training
Yes.
sessions.
Yep.
Too familiar.
I'm sure you are. You can never be too familiar with a platform that expensive.
True.
They're not going to sponsor this, are they?
They may.
They may. Yeah, exactly. I still have good connections there. But we had two of the HR recruiters who saw over 100,000 applicants a year to work at Epic. And when we'd see them walking through the halls of Epic together, the two heads of HR, they were deemed the angel of death because that meant that someone was going to be dismissed. Tell us a little bit about yourself with that being said.
Sure.
With that awesome way to introduce
Nice.
human resources.
Yes. I, maybe unofficially have been referred as that, but I like to think that we're more, have a collaborative relationship with our employees and managers, and have developed more of that trust. Although at times you do get that look as you're coming down the hall. Oh no, what are they up to now? Well, my name is Kay Starr. I'm actually live in the Viroqua area. I've been here in Vernon County area my entire life, so I am a native. I'm married to my husband, Craig, who also lives in the area. He's been here the bulk of his life as well. We have 3 adult children that are married and 3 grandchildren, and all of them live in the Viroqua area. So we're
That's
very
special.
proud to be able to work and live in our community. So I think that says a lot. I think sometimes your families grow up, move away, and we've been able to keep that balance of having a good work-life quality family thing going.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. It's I think it's rare, quite frankly.
It is. It is. I feel very privileged to be able to have them close by and that they even want to be near their parents. That's a good thing.
Absolutely.
So working at Vernon Memorial, I've been there, I was telling Nora, I've been here 30 years in December.
Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you. It's
a
I've seen
major
a lot of
achievement.
changes in 30 years. When I started, 30 years ago, which was like in December of 1988, we had 165 employees, and it was just a hospital. Since then, we've grown to just under 600 employees. We're not just a hospital anymore. We have clinics in the area. We have remote clinics offsite into some of other neighboring communities. We have retail pharmacies. We've acquired assisted living facilities, probably missing some hospice house. So yeah, we're not just strictly healthcare anymore. We've really grown and evolved. One story I kind of like to share too is when I first started 30 years ago, there really was not a human resource department at Vernon Memorial. I replaced an older gal who was going to be retiring, and she pretty much just did payroll function. So she really had, I guess there were files, but I wouldn't really call them comprehensive personnel files by any means. So I do have some pride in that. In growing to where we are today, I've been an integral part of that, developing everything from the ground floor up to what we have in existence today. I'm not saying everything's perfect and in order, it changes, things change constantly, but we've seen a lot of growth and evolution. So I'm proud to have been part of that.
Absolutely.
Growth model.
As you well should be. I mean, human resources is complex.
It's very complex.
And I know that starting out, I think one of the best things that actually happened to me was going from a big business like Epic to my own business. There were some things that I knew that I had to put in place when I started. If you were to give like just 3 tips off the top of your head to an entrepreneur who's starting, what might those be?
First and foremost, I think becoming familiar and understanding employment laws, have a knowledge of the regulations that may be applicable to your own individual business. Healthcare is kind of unique. We have probably a lot more regulations than some other standard businesses or companies might. But being familiar with what you need to know to keep you out of trouble and to be compliant. Secondly, developing comprehensive employment policies and procedures, pulling that all together. And then the third thing would be adhering to those policies and procedures and being consistent. You could probably hear me say consistency a lot.
Sure. So over the last 30 years, you've kind of built the hospital organization from the ground up. I mean, for someone kind of coming into a business, I think that the rules and regulations surrounding the idea, like, well, I'm going to have 6 employees, or maybe not. Maybe I'm going to have 8, but 2 of them are going to be part-time, and this is how we're going to work it. What would you say to someone who's in that position, like when it comes to understanding labor law? Are there specific things that you would look for, or specific criteria that you might check down?
Yeah, I think the websites, obviously, there's so much available on the internet. You can go to the Department of Labor. You can go to the Department of Industry of Labor, DILR, I'll just say that,
Sure.
Department of Industry, Labor, and Human Relations. So there are a ton of websites out there, governmental websites, both federal and state, that really should be checked out. There's requirements for postings, making sure that you're compliant with all of those pieces. So again, I think the resources are out there, just you kind of have to jump around and search for them.
Mm-hmm. So I think the hiring process is probably a place where many small businesses and smaller nonprofit entities have some challenges. Even if they don't have challenges initially, they may have some later. How does a person conduct a proper hiring process from start to finish?
Right.
What does that
And I
look like?
think in a smaller business or a smaller company, it's probably a lot more casual, a lot more informal. And maybe that works. Coming from a larger organization, and I'm a very structured person, so that's kind of my nature as well. But I feel that you have to have a lot of clearly defined processes in place. So first off, I think job descriptions are critical. So for each of the positions that you might have, you should develop some type of it doesn't have to be a big formal job description, but something that will define what those work duties are and what that might look like, because that's going to help you as you're doing your training and recruiting. So you could create a job posting. So whatever you're going to mechanism, you might want to do that again on the internet, in the local paper, whatever that might look like. But create an accurate job posting that's really going to attract your relevant candidates. Hopefully you can kind of screen out the people that really are not viable at that point. Once you've screened them, you're looking at the applications that have come in. I would also recommend basing it upon defined criteria, because you certainly don't want to set yourself up for any type of discriminatory complaint. You didn't look at me because I'm a woman and I'm over 40, or I'm this or that, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that you're adhering to those EEOC guidelines, screen them, and then have your defined criteria on who you're selecting to start looking at. So when you bring those selected candidates in for your interview, then you're going to take them through an interview process, and we're going to have the conversation. One of the things we do upon the initial interview is give them a copy of the job description. We ask them to read that before the interview starts. They've then had the opportunity to get a little bit better understanding, a little more comprehensive than maybe just a little small 1-inch ad in the paper online.
Right.
So they'll read that information, and then we will go through that interview process. Sometimes we will do second interviews. It's really hard to gauge an individual, sometimes just from the first 30-minute meeting with them. You might want to bring them back. Specifically for higher level or more critical positions, we want to make sure that we're getting the right people hired for that position that's going to potentially stay in our organization and be that right fit for our culture. We've also looked at incorporating peer panel or including coworkers in the interview, bringing in other people that are going to be working with this individual, because as a coworker, you're going to have to take ownership in the success of that person. So we want you to have buy-in on that. We want you to support that decision. Mm-hmm. We also sometimes will do job shadowing. So maybe just doing a little tour with that individual, take them to the actual work site. This is where you'd be located. Here's some of your coworkers. again, giving them a good feel for what that work environment's going to look like. They have a good understanding of the role, and then can decide if that's right for them as well before we go to that next step of defining who we want to make that offer to. One best practice, I know you guys are kind of into best practice things. One thing that I hear fairly often, we'll have individuals come in and they'll say, well, are you going to notify me if one way or the other? And we always do that. So even if I interview you, or maybe you weren't interviewed, you were not even selected for an interview, we're going to respond to you, via a letter, via email, whatever method is appropriate. But we do notify all of our applicants. It's really, I think, from a good marketing perspective, to not leave people hanging out there. So even as a small business, I think that's a best practice they could adopt.
That's great.
In the interview process, when trying to determine personality of the candidates, and also if they'll be a good fit in general for the business or the organization, what are some strategies for asking the right questions to determine personality and if they are, in fact, the right fit for the position?
That can be real tricky because everybody that's coming in for an interview has typically got their best face forward, right?
Of course they do.
We have to kind of look at that and say, okay, are they being genuine, or do I have to kind of dig down a little bit deeper? First off, we want to make that candidate feel comfortable. And I think people are a little more open and a little more genuine with you if they're not intimidated. And it's quite natural for people to feel nervous. So when you're coming in for an interview, a lot of people will voice that they're nervous. So we try to somehow get them to relax. On the flip side, when we do too many peer panel interviews and you've got a panel of maybe 4 people in there, that's more intimidating for people. So that may kind of backfire on us. But getting them to be as comfortable as we can, because I feel we're going to get more natural responses from them. We've also incorporated some behavioral-based interview questions. And with behavioral-based interview questions, which you probably have heard of, it's not that new of a thing, but you can come up with questions that are specific situational things that people really are not going to be able to give you a canned answer. They kind of have to think about it, come up with a personal experience that they might have had, and then kind of puts them on the spot a little bit more about being honest with their answers.
What's an example of that, Kay?
Perfect. I did
And
bring.
of course she
Oh,
has
good.
one.
Yeah. Drop it on
I
me.
was afraid I wasn't going to remember,
This is
so
so great.
I pulled a copy. So this is some that we hope not letting the cat out of the bag here
Oh,
for
no.
any future nurse interviews. But
I just want to say I'm super nervous. Thank you for inviting me in today. But I just wanted to let you know that I am nervous. So whatever you can do. Okay.
We'll try to help you get
Okay, thank you.
more relaxed here. And these are very easy questions.
Oh, that's
and
what you
again,
think.
Not non-threatening. It's not threatening, but can you give us an example of a time when you had a conflict or some difficulty working with another coworker?
Wow, that's a really good question. And thanks for asking it. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to answer this. I can think of back to a few times where I've had a difficulty with a coworker, and I think it was just because we came from different backgrounds, and maybe this particular coworker, I was actually I was her boss, so to speak. And she was very strong and independent, and sometimes I felt like I was crushing that independence and strength, and it led to conflicts where she often said that I was maybe mansplaining or really...
You need to stop it. I knew you were going to do
He was rambling.
He's just rambling. Write it down, honestly. He's a rambler.
And
Not a good fit.
Are we doing the what not to do in interview?
Yeah, exactly. Basically, I'm giving everyone at home the opportunity to not emulate my footsteps here.
So another behavioral-based interview question.
You take this one, Nora.
All right, for Nora this time.
Great.
I think we should have Caleb do a few of these too.
We can include them. I've got 4 if we
Yes.
want that many examples.
Yes.
So when you've received feedback in the past, what have you been told your strengths are? And what have you been told that you need to work on?
Ooh, good one. Dish it.
This is a good one. See, now I'm getting nervous too.
Oh, you see, it's not that easy, is it?
No, it isn't easy.
Yeah.
It really puts people on the spot
It
a little
does.
bit. Yeah.
It does.
Because you
So I'm
don't have
supposed
time to make up something.
So one of the things that I always appreciate when I'm interviewing somebody is when someone is nervous and they're not entirely sure, they ask for the question to be repeated, or
Certainly.
they start to repeat the question just a little bit and ask if that was indeed the question before they respond.
This is a good stalling tactic.
Yes.
I mean, really. I mean, you catching
works.
this?
Gives her some time to think.
It does, doesn't it?
As long as you can think and talk at the same time.
All right, you're doing great. No, so tell us, Nora.
So I'm supposed to talk about my strengths
And maybe some weaknesses?
and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
My strengths are that I am passionate about my work and very dedicated to getting work done. I can also get a high volume of work done that's quite accurate in a short period of time. And I think one of my weaknesses is that sometimes I take feedback too personally.
Excellent question. Excellent
Even though I
response.
don't mean to. I mean, it's just, that's true.
Yeah, it is true. It's
I
fine.
never
It's good.
planned on us answering
Oh,
these
but
questions.
why not? I mean, how
But
useful
then
of a resource
the other
tool.
thing that I appreciate that people do is they'll say, does that completely answer your question? And so I think that's another good way, whether you're interviewing or not, just to make sure that the question is being answered completely. And then it's nice for the person conducting the interview to be able to say, yes, that does completely answer my question, or actually I'd like to ask one other little piece of that.
Yep, expound on it.
Right.
Yeah, and I feel that both of you really gave me some pretty genuine responses.
Yeah.
Again, maybe demonstrating that behavioral-based interview questions do work and are effective.
Because I never know who's listening at home. So, like, I just don't want to be, like, writing an email like, that guy's full of it. I managed him before, too. Hey, but on that note, that's my that guy's full of it voice.
Good.
You like
Really
that
good.
one?
Yeah.
Kay, at Epic, we used actually Rembrandt testing.
Oh.
So before you ever got to the phone screen, you put in an application, and then they would
That's the
determine.
personality thing.
Yeah, it's a personality profile, and it breaks you into like 12 different quadrants, or it breaks a personality. But most of them are behavioral based questions, and it's just actually tweaks sometimes on the same riff of questioning to see how consistently you answer it.
Right.
In the same fashion. So they were looking for like creativity, assertiveness,
I've
ability
had to do that before.
ability to follow rules, structure, stuff like that. The real psychology of understanding how managers and employees sometimes interface was gathered from that personality profile. Do you, when you're using behavioral based questions, do you work any of those aspects in? Based on the managing candidate or the potential manager, and then again based on the employee and their position.
Right. Human resources does not do the interviewing alone. So the manager is going to be actively involved in that process. So as the manager, there's going to be an element of figuring out if there's that connectivity that, yes, this person I trust, I think I can work with them. I think they have the skill sets that I need. So they're actually very integral in.
Can you give me another behavioral brain buster? I like this one.
Sure. All right, I'm going to pick a good one here for you. In
Only
what
you.
ways do you show commitment and loyalty to your employer? How do you promote or support its mission, vision, and values? And then comment on any participation in community events, committee assignments, or assist with new staff training.
Well, I just have to say, first and foremost, that's a really big and tough question. That's
a long question.
That's a long question, yeah. Hi-ho, Kermit the Frog here, and I'm applying for a job in your organization.
No, what I want to say, I can't keep that
Denied.
voice up the entire time.
Denied.
Yeah, exactly. Or I get sued. So that's a really lovely question. Thanks for asking. How I show loyalty to my employer? Well, in the best case scenario, I show that by being a dedicated employee and being an absolute ambassador to the structure of the business. The worst case scenario in that is I show up every day, right? I'm there.
It's commitment.
I show up and I don't take a lot of sick days. And sometimes I don't even use all my vacation. So there, that's my commitment. Now, as far as being in the community, I like going out to eat. No, I get in, for myself personally, I get engaged, right? I sit on numerous boards. Most of them being not for profit or nonprofit status. I try and be a spokesperson in the community for some of the amazing things that we have happening here. And additionally, I really take the identity of the community to heart, which I think is a reflection of the business. Now, it just so happens that I own the business, so it makes it a lot easier to have that as the identity, but I would say that kind of plugs it in. And furthermore, I think that in the midst of running and owning a business or having different pieces moving, I take some of the most satisfaction in my work in the community. I think it's so important and so vital to see everything around me move up, because I definitely believe that when we all do better, we all do better. And if there's a way to be integrated into a community and do that, that's where I want to be.
I give him an A on that answer.
Right.
Boom.
Very good.
Nailed it. And again, very genuine, very sincere. Very
Minus the
very-
Kermit the Frog.
The Kermit the Frog part, but
Or Donnie.
Got some humor.
sometimes a little humor. I think if you can work it into an interview, of course you don't want to go overboard, and for the love of Pete, do not be offensive. But I think that humor really does it loosens people up. People want to laugh. They want to be in that situation and feel like they can relax themselves.
Right.
So if it's self-deprecating, which most of my humor is, because, well, you know me.
I do.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
This is a short one, Nora.
Yeah, come on,
It's
Nora.
the last one I have. So share with us an example of a time when you received constructive criticism. How did it make you feel? And what if you didn't agree with it?
I actually received a little bit of constructive criticism today. And it was from a person who I value their opinion and their place in the community very highly. And there was some need for some clarification about some communication that had been emailed out. And I listened to the feedback and I agreed with quite a bit of the feedback, actually. And we discussed how we can do better next time as an organization to make things a little bit more clear and straightforward for this person and the entity that they represent. And it gave me a few moments to really think about strategy in the future and making sure that lots of other variables are considered before communicating. And this was a communication that probably would have been best handled with a phone call versus an email, because emails can make things tricky sometimes. And so it was relatively easy for me to take that feedback, not take it personally, listen to it, talk about it, and make sure that we can do better next time.
Excellent. You do raise a good point about email. It's really hard to tell inflection of the voice, intent, what is coming across as in a written form versus a face-to-face conversation. Totally agree with that. So that was effective.
Yeah, it was.
That face-to-face point, I want to jump into that in the human resources world. Talk to us just a little bit, Kay, about body language. Right? If I am, I'm asking you a question, and for those of you who are at home who can't see me, which, you're probably better off, but right now I'm sitting with my arms crossed. Kay, what did you do this last weekend?
Yeah, it comes across as a little threatening, a little intimidating, because if your arms were down or open, it would be a little more of an open feeling. Eye contact. Are you looking at me? Or are you evasive? Or am I being evasive because I don't want to make that eye contact and answer the question?
Right. And I think that a lot of employers really take for granted that body language. Sometimes we bring those emotions into an interview with us when we're actually actively screening an applicant. And that is so important to make sure that you're shaking off whatever else you're carrying through the course of the day and try and approach that with a blank slate.
Plus, if you're not trying to make me nervous, you'd make me nervous if you're sitting there with your arms crossed.
Right. Exactly. Can't help it. One of the first things we did at the cafe when we took it over, actually, we had an employee manual. And the employee manual that we wrote was really, really basic. It was kind of a distillation of, I would say, 5 or 6 restaurants that I had worked at or worked for, and then, taking a little bit of, some HR practices that we knew we were going to run into. Talk to us for a second about the importance of an employee manual.
Oh, I'm a strong advocate for having
look
an
at
employee
you.
manual.
She
Even brought my
raises
little
the employee manual.
Yeah, we've had one in place, and this was one of the first things that I put together when I started a number of years ago. And of course, we've had to make ongoing, constant revisions of that to make sure it's current. But when we pull this together, this is again, I think, a condensed version of your actual P&P. So you've got your policy and procedure manuals, which are at length, right? But you need, I think, a wonderful resource for your employees. If I need a quick little reference guide to look up, I need a refresher on the job description. Does this prohibit open-toed shoes in my department for this season? Whatever that might be, I can have a quick go-to guide, quick reference. Needs to be available and accessible to people. We actually have it available online, so we sort of have this intranet, if you will, a place where people can actually go and bring it up and look at the electronic version of it. We used to have hard copy, but just based on trying not to have a lot of extra printing and updates, it's just easier to do online. But in a smaller company, it may make sense to have paper copies available for people to have and to read. When you talk about what it should be included in there, I kind of have some sections that I outlined here, and these actually have not changed a lot over the years. So we just start off with like a welcome introduction. Again, brief. We're not doing the whole policy manual. Communications, and outlining a number of bullet points beneath that section. Personal behavior, which is where the dress code example would fall into. A discipline and termination section. Even though that's scary, it's like people need to know what is expected and what they might do to get themselves into trouble. Hiring practices. We include like a payroll section, just helping people understand the time card process, their pay system, the cycle, that type of thing. Benefits, which is fairly lengthy. Again, just little snapshots. It's not the whole policy and SPD and all that. It's just giving them a brief overview of it. Employment policies, again, at a glance. And safety and health. And then we have just a little conclusion as well. So those are the areas that we put together. I think it's important for the business or the organization to customize it based on what their needs are, make it unique to them. And I'm all about sharing, we have other rural Wisconsin hospital counterparts that we have shared maybe forms or policies. We can't share certain information, obviously. We're limited. But, if someone has a best practice like on a handbook format or something, or maybe a certain policy or topic, it's wonderful to be able to share that and not have to recreate the wheel.
I think you hit on a couple of important notes there. And one of the things that I'm struck by as I hear you speak that I guess I've been talked to about this for a long time by human resources professionals, but I think I'm seeing the need for implementation. Sometimes humans need structure. Structure creates an environment that people are allowed to thrive in. And I think that a solid employee manual that kind of outlines the expectations. This is what we're actively trying to promote. So in our employee manual, we have the mission of the restaurant, which is to be a bridge in the community, be a vehicle for growth into the future, to be the authority on local food and dining experiences. We also believe in the mantra, good energy equals good food, which opens us up to some interpretation as far as like workplace performance, what we find acceptable and what we don't find acceptable. But you touched a little bit there on termination. and firing. And, this is the dark side of HR. This
It
is why, the angel of death reputation, surrounds people in the human resources world. And I can say that as a business owner, or having been a manager now for the better part of 15 years, it's the worst part of the job. Mm-hmm. And I think most small business owners would say that staffing is the worst. Yeah. I think that there is, and hopefully you can kind of color this for us, structure, creating real structure for people to work in is kind of your ally. And can you talk a little bit about that idea?
Absolutely. I would completely agree. It's the not fun part of the work that we do, but it's very necessary. Typically, people avoid conflict because it's not comfortable for them, right? Mm-hmm. But by avoiding it, it usually makes the problem become bigger, larger, and a lot more painful in the end. So I'm an advocate for dealing with things promptly in an appropriate way. So when you talk about management, what do you do when you have a performance issue with someone? Again, start at that basis point. When you onboarded them, when you hired them, you gave them that job description, you gave them your manual, they signed an agreement that they would comply with that. So if it's all been clearly communicated, but if they're falling short of those expectations, it then becomes your responsibility to make them aware of that. First off, coaching. You just have that conversation, that initial conversation. Look, did you realize that, when you started, we talked about you doing this process this way. I see that you're not. That's not happening. Can you tell me why? Let's talk about it, and here's what I need you to do going forward. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's some negotiation in that, and maybe you had a great idea, and it's like, wow, we need to rethink that. So I think you have to go into it with a little bit of an open mind. Goal, ultimately, I always keep in my mind, the goal is that I want you to be successful. We want our employees to be successful. We spend a lot of time and effort and money and training and onboarding. And people, I think, genuinely are good people. Mm-hmm. There's a handful, mm-hmm. but the majority of people are really good people. We want them to be successful, right? So helping them to explain to you what are the barriers for them not being successful, why they're falling short, why they're not meeting those expectations. Maybe it's something that we can remove the barrier. Maybe it's something as simple as of a daycare conflict. I can't get here till 8:30. The position is 8 to 5. Could my hours be changed to 8:30 to 5? I could be very successful. So it might be something that simple, or it may be something that's really not even a debatable option and it's off the table. So mm-hmm. you can kind of work through that. But coaching would kind of be that first step, talking through, recognizing there's a problem. I want to work with you on this, and then monitoring and seeing how that goes. Secondly, I'd probably look at moving towards a performance improvement plan. If it's something some employee that I really cherish and value and I want them to be successful, I'm going to put some specific outlines down. I'm going to give you criteria, and I'm going to hold you accountable to that. We're going to measure that. We're going to meet frequently, monitor your progress. Mm-hmm. And then if that's not working, then unfortunately we're probably going to have to go down that little slippery slope of a verbal warning, a written warning, and maybe even ultimately discipline for termination. Mm-hmm. Written warnings, we do sort of have a step process, but we can escalate that if we need to. So depending on the infraction, obviously if it's something hugely significant that's outlined in the handbook, a major intentional willful violation, that may be an immediate discharge. But for the most part, you have to go off the assumption that people are not doing things intentionally. We're trying to work with them to right their behaviors. Again, making sure that your policy, procedures, and handbooks outline what your steps are a little mm-hmm. bit. So that's a guide for people to know what to expect. And then, hear me say this again, being consistent with those practices. Yeah. So right. I'm not treating Nora differently than I'm treating Luke. Right. You can get a slide on this, but I'm holding your fingers to the fire on it.
It's always the case with me.
That's probably a good idea anyway.
Yeah, whatever. It's just because you're intimidated by me. Oh my goodness.
But so, along those lines with the employee manual and the best practices and the steps, and Can you talk a little bit about the documenting and making sure that the employer or the nonprofit or whatever it is has a good paper trail for what some of the next steps may be post firing, like unemployment or
Sure, having
some of
forms
those
in
other
place,
things.
is that what you're referring to? Yeah,
Yep.
we actually have a disciplinary form document. And it could be, again, nothing overly fancy or creative, but it just basically lists the employee name, talking about what the date the conversation was held. The manager and HR would collaboratively do this together. What was the issue? And we really try to backtrack the issue to reference to the handbook. And we have violations noted, so maybe it's section X23, whatever. You violated this section of the handbook. So this is what we're, giving you a verbal notice about today. So then there's that paper trail, which is critical. Documentation is critical.
Right.
So even if it's just a conversation, and maybe it's not a verbal at this point, but I had to talk to you about dress code, or I had to talk to you about, I always pick on dress code, or something else, attendance, tardiness, whatever it might be, you need to start that paper trail. And that really, in our organization, because we're a little bit larger, that falls on the manager because they're dealing with those day-to-day issues. In a smaller business organization, that falls on maybe the manager or the owner, right? So document, and that's, again, very important, because if it gets to the point where you need to proceed to do something more serious, you can show that you've given them every opportunity to improve. It's still not meeting the expectations. And then ultimately, if it did have to go down that route of termination, then you are in a more defensible situation should there be a challenge for that termination. And we talked a little earlier about, unemployment claims too,
Right.
and having that documentation. So if you receive an unemployment inquiry, you have all of the information to provide why this person did not meet the job expectations.
Yeah. Okay.
One of the things that actually was coached to me, and let's see if it still holds water, was when I was managing people in a corporate setting. In my email inbox, I would create a folder for every employee that I managed. And when I had to go through with disciplinary actions, I would send myself an email, basically. So to Luke Zahm at blah, 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 driftlesscafe.com. And then send it to myself, and then slide that particular email with the infraction, with what the violation was, or maybe where I needed to talk to them, and then put it in that person's file. So that way, as that person shifted, if they went to a different team leader, or they went to a different group, or they transferred within the company, as the incoming manager, I would just kind of be like, okay, this is what I kind of have on this individual. This is like the record of interactions that I've had over the past 2 years, and it gave them the opportunity to kind of pick up where I left off. Now, sometimes you'll have an employee and a manager that just, there's conflict. And I think that utilizing this method had at least promoted continuity, which helps consistency, right?
Absolutely. If I have a manager coming into my office, I'm having difficulty with Joe Smith in my department, first thing I'm going to ask them for is, where's your documentation? What's transpired up to this point? What have you talked to Joe about? Let's take a look at that. So you're absolutely right. That's great. Pro and con about maybe passing that along to a new manager. I think, again, within an organization, we don't want to set the stage for failure and assumptions that this behavior in this department will continue here. There's a chance that could.
Sure.
But sometimes new managers will be like, I kind of want to just give this person a fresh, clean slate. But if there's problems, I'm going to go back and review that.
Sure.
It's kind of manager preference, but it's good and wonderful to have that documentation.
Awesome. You've got a question.
I do. But my computer decided it was going to be no longer with us.
So you've been in the profession for many years. Yeah, but what 3 pieces of advice would you give to listeners regarding human resources? I mean, obviously we kind of hit you up for 3 best practices starting out, but like what are the 3 big ones?
Yeah. If nothing else, what are the 3 things that they must
do, or keep in mind at
Right,
least.
or-
And this
yeah.
is kind of a challenging question.
Yeah.
You only had to pick 3, right?
How does it make
But-
you feel? Are you uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Are you nervous?
Yeah. Maybe initially I've kind of worked.
Exactly.
Good.
Take a deep breath.
Since I got to interview that, I'm feeling it's kind of a two-way street here.
Feels better.
I think keeping in mind that your people are your number one asset, and what they do for you can make or break your company and your organization. So there needs to be that respect and understanding, right? And I'm not saying you give them free rein and carte blanche, but manage them effectively. Okay, so just remember that focus, because they're your company, they're your
Right.
business. They take care of your patients, they take care of your customers, etc. Secondly, which I think is critical, showing appreciation, gratitude,
Yes.
respect. Those, people. It isn't always that. Oh, a pat on the back does more sometimes than just not hearing it, and that boosts people so much and makes them feel so good. So showing that appreciation is critical.
Yeah.
And then I would say reflect on the mission, goals, objective, vision, whatever for your organization, which it sounds like you did, Luke. What is that? Focus on that and remember why it is that we are in the field we're in, or what drew us into the occupation or the role that we're in currently. And try to keep that passion alive, because that is a huge challenge. We are all so busy. We get inundated, and unfortunately, a lot of the negative things pop up so much more often than the positive do. Did I say that right? The negative pop up more than the positive do.
Yep.
So keeping that passion alive within yourself, because that's going to help you be the best person you can in your role, which is going to then support the mission, vision, goals of your organization. It kind of keeps us in line.
Yeah, that's good. That's really, really good. Do you have anything else? You have a staff, Nora.
Yeah.
What are? Yeah, I know. Again,
I remember.
Do you have anything that you want to add to the human resources?
I don't think so. I think, it's really been a pleasure to talk to Kay. I think that someone that has 30 years of experience doing this really important work is someone that we should all be listening to very carefully and should be really grateful for. So I said that to Kay earlier before we were on the air, but I think that's something that people need to hear more of. So I'm sure Kyle tells you how much he appreciates you all the time, but this is a real achievement, and you should be really proud of yourself. One of my philosophies as a manager is I want to make sure that the people who are part of my organization want to come to work, and that they feel valued, and that they feel that I'm advocating for them and making sure that I'm creating the best possible environment for them. I really want all of my staff to be able to grow and learn and change and become the best possible professionals that they can. And so, I hope that all of the other executive directors and small business owners and people that are listening do really take to heart what you said, Kay, about showing gratitude, because it really makes a big, big difference when people feel like they're appreciated, even when the weeks are really, really hard and, the challenges seem insurmountable. If you can just let people know that what they're doing matters, it makes all the difference in the world.
Thank you for your kind words, Nora.
Of course,
and
it's well deserved.
yes, and basically what you're saying makes me think that you would be and are probably an awesome manager. You get it. You get what it takes.
Caleb is silent. This is why we don't give Caleb a microphone in the back, people.
Yes. Well, thank
great.
you so much for chatting with us today, Kay. We really appreciate you being part of our show.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed it as well. I've learned a lot from you both. So thank you again for having me.
Of course, you've been listening to the 54665, all things economic development, all things rural America, and all things Viroqua. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.